and I will be pulling up the presentation for today. One moment. Okay. All right, so Marianne, would you like to do the introduction?
I certainly would. Hello, everyone. I'm Marianne Graham. I'm the Housing and Compliance Director for Money Follows the Person at the Maryland Department of Health. And welcome to today's Tenant Training 101 competency course for case managers. There are a total of 4 workshops in this series, and all the content will be delivered virtually. Our workshops are running starting today from August 18th through September 8th, every Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you must register through Zoom for each webinar session and attend each webinar session before you'll be able to schedule tenant training with a certified tenant trainer from the Maryland Partnership for Affordable Housing and complete one-on-one tenant trainings independently with your clients. To start, we just wanted to go over some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A and we'll answer these at the end of the workshop. And then I will also respond to certain clarifying questions during the webinar. And if you have comments or are responding to questions that do not use polling, please use the chat feature. And if you're having any issues, with hearing us, please again use the chat feature or the raise your hand feature. And remember, to receive a certificate, you must complete all workshops in this series. And today's presenter is Chelsea Heyman. Chelsea is the Director of Housing Policy and Programs at the Maryland Department of Disabilities. And she's also a member of the Maryland Partnership for Affordable Housing. So I'll let you take over, Chelsea.
All right, great. Thank you for the introduction, Marianne. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Tenant Training 101 competency course series. Many of you may have already done tenant training with one of your clients or have heard us talk about it if you have had a client who has leased an 811 or Weinberg unit. So this will really be a deep dive for those of you who either have been either part of a tenant training in the past or those of you who have heard us just chat about it. So that way you have an idea of what exactly it is we talk about when we do tenant training with individuals in our who are leasing in our program. Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to go over the speakers that will be part of this series. As Marianne mentioned, this is a several workshop, 4-part workshop series. So I listed here the individuals from my department, as well as the department that Marianne is with, the Department of Health. We will also have some presenters from the Coordinating Center, Renita Broadwater and Denise Lopez presenting as part of this series. They conduct tenant trainings independently with their clients who are leasing units through our program. And we will have Lucy Parsley from Disability Rights Maryland presenting as well. She is a attorney that works with individuals with disabilities around issues of ADA compliance or possible housing discrimination due to disability status. She is an expert in the areas of reasonable accommodations and modifications, as well as the Fair Housing Act and how it relates to people with disabilities. So that will be I believe our last workshop in the series. And so that's going to be in September. All right. I just want to go over this, as Marianne mentioned, the process of obtaining or maintaining a certification for conducting tenant training. So the purpose of this workshop series is to get all of you certified in conducting tenant training independently with your clients. This is a webinar series that you have to register for each webinar in the series. I had sent out a constant contact invite to many of the people who are on this call. If you did not receive that invite, you're welcome to send me an email directly through the housinginfo.mdod@maryland.gov. We can forward you that information, but you do have to register for each webinar separately. Our next webinar is going to be next Wednesday, the 25th at the same time. And at the end of this presentation today, I will include a link to the registration. So if you have not already signed up for that, sign up for it as soon as you possibly can. And that way you can continue on the series and get the certification that you need to conduct this tenant training. At the end of this series, you will be in need of a shadowing opportunity. So someone from the MPAH staff will reach out to you to schedule a time where you can witness us conducting a tenant training with an individual leasing in the program. Could be for the Weinberg Apartments program or the 811 program or community choice homes, because the content is essentially the same. There's some distinctions here and there between the different programs, but generally similar content. And what you'll do then is you'll shadow us conducting that tenant training with the individual who is moving into their new apartment. And then we'll observe you at a later time doing the tenant training content and delivering it to a person who's leasing up a new unit. So it helps us to see how it is that you're applying some of the information that you've learned from this series to working with clients directly and helping them get acclimated to their new community that they're moving into. If you have any questions about this process, again, the email at the bottom is the best way to reach out to us. Myself or my staff person, Christina Bulliard, who's not with us today, would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so I just wanted to go over the purpose of tenant training. So tenant training provides residents with the tools needed to live independently and enjoy the features of their apartment community. This is a definition that I came up with because I do believe that tenant training is essential to an individual maintaining their apartment and also being able to live in the community. A lot of times, what happens in our programs is we have people who move from one county to a completely new place. They may know very few people around there. Their support system might be an hour or an hour and a half away. So this is important to think about. So put yourself in the shoes of the person you're working with. When they make that move, it's going to be both jarring and also an opportunity for them to be able to either make a new community in a new place, become more independent, develop social skills, work with other people. It's going to be a learning and growth experience for that person as well. So just like anyone else, when they're moving into the community or really even changing environments, there's going to be a lot of questions that somebody might have, particularly if they depend on things like public transportation, if they depend on assistance with different activities of daily living. All of these are things that have to be in place for them to successfully transition to the community. So put yourself in the shoes of the person that you are working with and imagine what it would be like if you were the person that had to suddenly move to a completely new place. Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll here. So to be able to conduct tenant training independently, case managers only need to attend today's workshop once. So if you could respond to that poll, and I will end it, give a couple more minutes. All right, great. So people were listening when I initially stated that this is a multi-series workshop. We're going to have several several different presentations about tenant training. It is both a simple and complicated thing to do because you have to cater it based on the person that you're working with. It will be different. Great, thank you everybody who participated in that poll. Okay. So this gives you a description of what tenant training specifically is. It's a one-time appointment with a person. Normally it happens about 30 days after they've moved into their new apartment. We typically have done these in person, but because of the pandemic, we have shifted to doing these virtually or over the phone. I will say that they are not as impactful virtually or over the phone. However, anything is better than nothing. And due to the public health emergency that we're in, that is the option that we have currently. I don't believe that there are many agencies doing these in person presently, but it's certainly something that the agency has specific protocol for staff. We understand that. And we understand that, you know, actually meeting with people that you're working with, it's going to look different depending on what agency you're with. So I've left this kind of broad for that reason. Really, the main purpose of it is to look over an individual's lease, the community rules and lease violations, apartment cleaning and basic maintenance, reasonable accommodations and modifications, utility allowances, and more. So when you meet with a person, you're going over this information, and we have the tools in place where it's very simple. The tools that MPAH put together really helps you get through this process and guide you through working with somebody one-on-one to complete the tenant training. Trainer requirements. So currently, the people that are certified to train are people who are MDOD staff and MDH staff. We do have authorized representatives from the agencies listed there that are also able to train because they have conducted the shadowing with our staff members. This goes over why tenant training is important. One of the big reasons why I think it is so necessary for someone to get tenant training is that they understand their rights as a tenant in the community. So if someone needs a reasonable accommodation or modification, say they need a grab bar installed in their shower, they really need to know what the process is of getting a grab bar installed. You know, does the property want to see some kind of medical documentation? Is there a form that they want them to fill out? Would a letter suffice? Things of that nature. Although having some of those things is not necessarily a requirement to having the modification installed. If somebody simply requests it, the property needs to be able to do those things for that individual, as long as they're within a certain cost limitation and not excessive in cost to install. I do think that when it is a written request that the person makes with assistance from either a case manager or independently, there is a paper trail that if the actual request is not satisfied, they can go back to that paper trail and say, hey, I made this request a month ago. Why is this not completed? I just got a call recently from someone not in any of our programs, but somebody who made a request for a grab bar that has fallen multiple times. And her request was verbal, nothing was done through a written letter or anything of that nature. So it's a little bit harder to hold people accountable if you've made a verbal request. That's just something to keep in mind. It does allow tenants an opportunity to report possible concerns about the community. So if somebody is struggling with a neighbor, say they're having a hard time with the elevator working properly, things of that nature, they have to know the best way to communicate that information to the property manager. Maybe they prefer an email, maybe they want somebody to fill out a form. Again, all of this information is what things that people need to know up front when they move into a new community. It's also really helpful for someone to know what resources are in their area. think about it. If you move to a new community and you needed access to a food bank, you need to know what food banks are in the area. How do you get to the food bank? How many days of the week is it operating? Do they provide lunch, breakfast, or dinner? All of that information is important for a tenant to know when they move to a new community. Okay, so I'm going to launch another poll. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read this off first, and then I will launch the poll. You are conducting a tenant training at the new apartment of your client who is transitioning out of a residential rehabilitation program licensed by the Behavioral Health Administration. Your client has asked you for assistance with identifying the bus lines in the surrounding area so they are able to attend their therapy appointments. Is this something that you should cover in tenant training? So I'm going to launch this poll. Very good. Okay, a couple more seconds here. All right, I'm going to end the poll. All right, so we have mostly true and one false. That is correct. It is true. So, you know, although it's not your responsibility necessarily to drive someone to a therapy appointment, as a case manager and advocate for your client, you do want them to be aware of what bus lines they might be able to take. If they ask you that question when they've moved into their new community, it's a simple answer to provide them with. You could give them a link to a website if they're, you know, able to get on the website and look at what bus lines are in the area. Or you can research it yourself and tell them this goes to this location. This is how you get there. It's really, really important that somebody knows how to get around to access their doctor's visits, especially if they're in an area where transit is not as frequent. There's not much offered in that specific area. So if there's alternatives that somebody might be able to access, it's good for them to know what those are and how they go about signing up for those services. Okay. All right, so I just wanted to go over housing programs just to give people who are attending a general overview. There's a difference between tenant-based housing programs and project-based housing programs. The primary difference is that a tenant-based housing program is a voucher that stays with the tenant. So the tenant actually is responsible for identifying their own housing. They normally pay 30% of their total household monthly adjusted gross income to rent and utilities. One thing to keep in mind with the tenant-based housing programs, this is going to be things like a Section 8 voucher or housing choice voucher, or the mainstream voucher program as well. The Money Follows the Person Bridge Subsidy program is also a tenant-based housing program. So somebody is shopping around to find a unit that meets their needs. There are typically rent reasonableness requirements that go with these units in particular, meaning that a housing authority is going to evaluate whether or not that unit is reasonably priced based on market standards. So they're going to look at what the fair market value is of that unit before they approve somebody using a voucher to lease the unit itself. They also are going to have housing quality standards that go with inspecting the unit to ensure that it is safe for occupancy for the individual. A project-based housing program is essentially programs like Section 811, the Weinberg Apartments program, and community choice homes. These are subsidies that are tied to specific units in an approved project. Typically, they are low-income housing tax credit buildings. They may also be buildings that are owned by public housing authorities. So the Community Choice Homes program, that is primarily located within buildings that are owned by the public housing authority. The person still pays 30% of their total household monthly adjusted gross income to rent and utilities. One of the differences, though, between these two types of programs, eligible applicants are individuals or families who have incomes not exceeding 30% of the AMI. With a tenant-based housing program, eligible applicants are individuals or families who have an annual income of 50% or less of the AMI. So I should say with a caveat, some of these programs work a little bit differently. There are project-based housing programs that serve higher area median income thresholds than the 811 program serves, for instance, as well as tenant-based housing programs that serve different area median income thresholds. So it's important to know what the program has as its limits, particularly as you are setting standards and expectations with the client you're working with. Okay. Many of you are familiar with the Section 811 Project Rental Assistance Program. That's, I think, mostly why you are attending this webinar. The goal is 330 permanent supportive housing units funded using 2 HUD awards that total $21 million. This is actually not up to date, so my apologies. That is, we had received an additional funding for the HUD 811 program in federal fiscal year 2019. So that amount of permanent supportive housing units is actually about 100 additional to the 330. So that award that we just recently received funded roughly 100, will fund roughly 100 units. Again, the program is project-based rental assistance. These units are integrated. No more than 25% of units in a low-income housing tax credit building are designated for people with disabilities. What that means is that the building itself does not have entirely units occupied by people with disabilities. The purpose of this is to allow for people with disabilities to live in the community in a location that is not an institutional-like setting. So that is why we do not have buildings that are packed with units for people with disabilities only. Eligible applicants have to be between 18 to 62 and disabled based on the HUD definition of disability. They do have to be Medicaid recipients, and we do request Medicaid numbers when people fill out applications in our social serve waitlist system. And they do have to be eligible for long-term supports and services. So that means things like the Medicaid waiver programs. Could also be individuals getting support through a CIL, a Center for Independent Living. And their income has to be at or below 30% of the area median. This includes SSI level income. And I will, because that information is out of date, I'll actually put in the chat the correct numbers as well at the end of the presentation, so you all have that up-to-date information. These are our priority populations. So when you register and create an account in our social service system, the actual system will go through prompts that will request information about the person that you're working with. We do ask for their current living situation or status. These are the different living situations or statuses that are in the system. When it comes to waitlist prioritization, we look at the time date stamp, so when the application was filled out, and their current living situation. And the individuals we prioritize the highest are people who are institutionalized Medicaid recipients. As you can see here, we also prioritize people who are living in substandard housing or deplorable housing conditions, as well as people moving to independent renting. So that could be people who are moving out of residential rehabilitation programs, people who are in brain injury waiver ALUs, in different living situations where they are looking for an independent renting opportunity. We also prioritize individuals who are homeless Medicaid recipients. Okay, so this slide is actually up to date. The prior slide was not. So it's, as you can see here at the bottom, in November 2020, we received an award from HUD. It was 6.9 million, and that was for the 811 Project Rental Assistance Program. The first and second award, the first award had specific target locations. The second and third awards are statewide. Okay. The Weinberg Apartments program. So just to kind of give you an overview of this program, this predates 811 actually. It started in 2011. The program itself is again, a project-based rental subsidy program. You can see that there is specific income targeting that is a little bit different from the 811 program. I just want to go over that. So for the Weinberg 1 program, the first tranche of funding we received for that program targets people between 15 to 30% of the area median income. So we have specific units that have this designation, meaning that if we have turnover or if somebody decides to leave that unit, we will be leasing up that unit looking for people who fit that income requirement. The second award, income targeting was lowered to 10 to 30% of the area median income. As a case manager, what you need to know is that individuals who are leasing in the Weinberg program, they have to have some income to qualify. If they have no income, they can't qualify for this program. That means that they would end up being considered for the 811 program, for instance. So that is an important caveat between the two programs. The third tranche of funding we received last year from the foundation has the same income targeting as the second tranche, the 10 to 30% area median. It does have specific priority groups though, and I will go over those as well in the following slides. This is the general eligibility for the Weinberg Apartments program, very similar to 811. I do want to go over the criminal background requirement because that applies to both 811 and Weinberg. So in any federally assisted property as well, the individual cannot have a lifetime sex offense registry designation, and they cannot have been convicted of production of methamphetamine on federally assisted property. These are federal requirements. There is no way for us to get those waived. So if you have an individual in that situation, you have to think about what it is that you will be doing in terms of helping them identify housing options. It will be kind of difficult for them. It's possible that they could qualify to rent a unit in a building that has lower rent prices or costs, but they would not qualify to live in a federally assisted building. So these are the prioritization groups for Weinberg 1 and 2. The analysis that we go through when we look at people who are eligible and who meet these current living situation requirements is a little different than 811. So we still go off of time date stamp, but when somebody's name comes up on the list, we are looking at these factors as well. And actually, Christina, my staff person, and I have a conversation about people's different circumstances for these units as well. We just had one the other day. So we're looking at all of these factors when it comes to analyzing who will get higher priority over another individual. The Weinberg 3 prioritization is a little bit different. Again, they wanted to focus specifically on these target groups for this grant that we received from them last year. Transitioning youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are between the ages of 18 to 35, living with an aging caregiver in a group home setting, or transitioning from permanent supportive housing. Also looking at individuals and families who are homeless, and youth aging out of foster care who are disabled and homeless or at risk of homelessness. So if you have individuals who meet these priority categories, I encourage you to take a look in our system, get your account set up and enter the information of that person in our system to see if they might qualify for the Weinberg 3 prioritization. We are doing outreach to DHS specifically to identify some of the foster care youth that could qualify. So we're happy to partner with and also send more information to specific agencies that work with this group so we can get the word out about this opportunity. Oh. Okay. The MFP Bridge Subsidy Program, again, as I mentioned previously, this is a tenant-based rental assistance program. It is a 3-year program. So this program itself, a little bit different than the prior ones that I went over. A person has to be eligible for MFP, or they have to be a brain injury waiver participant transitioning from an alternative living unit. That is a requirement for the program. They have to be older than 18. Their household income has to be $19,000 or less. And they have to meet the requirements of the local public housing authority and housing choice voucher program. They have to be transitioning from an institutional setting to independent renting. So this specific program itself partners with housing authorities for the area. They designate a certain amount of housing choice vouchers for this specific program. So when a person is done their 3-year term with the program, they transition over to a housing choice voucher or a project-based housing voucher that's in a participating jurisdiction. Montgomery County actually transitions individuals into the Community Choice Homes program. So that's a project-based program. Looks like So I did have a question that came up in the chat. Do individuals interested in Weinberg 3 also need to have a source of income? Yes, they do. So Weinberg 3 uses the same income targeting requirements as the Weinberg 2 program, the 10 to 30% of area median income. The reason why that is, just to explain it a little bit better, is that 811 is a federal program, so it is an ongoing rental subsidy that the property receives on an annual basis for that participant. So if they don't have any income, that means that the property is getting a subsidy payment for the person. Weinberg is not like that. It is a grant program, so it actually contributes to the capital that helps with building the building. It offsets capital costs that a developer goes through when they're building a low-income housing tax credit building. It's not ongoing subsidy. It's a one-time grant that they receive. So they have to factor that in to their overall operating costs. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so these are the participating jurisdictions for the MFP Bridge Subsidy Program. You can see here that there are several jurisdictions that have subsidies available. So these are more rural areas. If in the event that you have individuals who you're working with, your supports planner, you have individuals that you're working with that are living in these areas or want to live in these areas, I'd certainly reach out to Marian Graham and or Lisa Waddell. I don't know specifically what the best way is of reaching them, but it would be appropriate for you to reach out to see if potentially one of your clients could qualify. We have had a difficult time leasing up units in some of these counties because they are so rural. So the subsidies are there, but we don't have the participants to take on those subsidies.
Chelsea, I just wanted to say that, the best way to reach us is through email. And we will be presenting next week and our emails will be available then. And I can also put them in the chat.
Very good. Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate that. Okay, so I'll briefly go over the Community Choice Homes program as well. This is specific to Montgomery County. So if you don't work in Montgomery County, or if you don't have somebody who formerly lived there, this will not be applicable to the individuals you are supporting, but it's good information to know. So we have a partnership with the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County to create 30 project-based rental assistance units in properties that they own. They are for extremely low-income people, so 30% of the AMI and below. And the rental units are available for a period of 15 years. They're called CCH, the Community Choice Homes Program. The county has, we've generously been working with them to identify properties that are appropriate for the program. One of the things to keep in mind is that we pull referrals for this program from our Weinberg apartment wait list. So when we're going through our wait list to see who qualifies, that's the list that we're pulling individuals from. They have to have indicated interest in living in Montgomery County or have a Montgomery County address at the time of referral, meet the CCH program eligibility, income, and general referral criteria. We will go to the HUD 811 waitlist as well if we cannot find individuals who are interested in the units that we have available in this program. So that's just something to keep in mind. A little bit more about the CCH program. The person has to be registered for the HOC housing path waitlist. So they have to be on both waitlists in order to get onto the program. HOC does the whole process of verifying eligibility, income, and criminal background. And the individual has to comply with the program requirements, maintaining eligibility for permanent housing assistance, complete tenant training, etc. So this is all very important for me to go over because it is a small program, but we partner a lot with the Housing Authority on this program. So if in the event that there's an individual you're supporting and you're going through the leasing process with them for this program, you will likely communicate with both Christina, myself, and also HOC. So it's important to stay in touch with them. And also these units are such that they sometimes cannot be held for a person. So we've had situations where if the unit is not leased quickly enough, or if the responsiveness of the applicant or their supports staff is not quick enough, we've had units for this program that have unfortunately had to be leased to another individual. So it's important to stay in touch and to make sure that you're communicating with all of us about the applicant that you're working with. There is a live work preference for this program. I don't see if that, trying to see if that's in these slides. Okay, here we go. So the individual has to have live or work in Montgomery County at the time of referral, or lived or worked in the county within 5 years of the referral, and currently lives outside of the county in an institution or group living setting. So it's really targeted to people who are somehow tied to Montgomery County. A lot of the requirements are similar, again, to our other programs that we already work in. There's a requirement of no lifetime sex offense registry or methamphetamine on federally assisted property. The individual is encouraged to participate in long-term supportive services that meet their individual needs. Okay, great. So I will go ahead. I know that was a mouthful. I'm going to go ahead and look at the chat and see if there's any in the Q&A, see if there's any questions I can answer. Okay, so we had a question in the Q&A. Does MDOD expect any 3-bedroom units to come online for the 811 Weinberg apartments, e.g. for families with 2 children who both have disabilities? So a couple things with this. There are not any 3-bedroom units in the 811 program. The program only has 1s and 2s. The Weinberg apartment program, we do have 3-bedroom units in one property in Annapolis called Town Courts. That is new. We've never had that before. And we do have some individuals interested in leasing those units who are families. That said, the applicant has to have a disability. That is important. So I've get many calls from people who have children who have a disability. The applicant has to be between 18 to 62. So that's a significant thing to keep in mind for the 811 program. They have to have, the lead applicant has to have the disability. Okay, the mother herself is disabled, then she could apply. That's fine too. I've had people contact me as well who are in that circumstance. But again, keep in mind that these units have requirements in terms of occupancy. So some units have a limit as to how many people can live there. We have that information in the community rules for any building that is undergoing leasing. They indicate how many people can live there for 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, etc. So check out the community rules and see if that is something that they would allow for, or you can also ask me or Christina. We have a question from AR Deskins. Are there any housing programs for individuals who are disabled and over the age of 62? So somebody who's over the age of 62 would be served by the Department of Aging. They are not eligible for our programs. So what I would recommend doing is have that person contact the Maryland Access Point or MAP program. They could connect them through options counseling with different housing opportunities that might be available to them. Typically, individuals who are older adults are going to be looking at opportunities to live in Section 202 buildings. So federally funded buildings for people who are older adults who want to live in an affordable apartment. But that would be the best way to get them connected to services for housing. Okay, great. All right, moving along. So my own front door, this is a manual for people who are going through the tenant training process. This document is something that our agency can provide to you if you are working with a client who is leasing up a new unit, has just moved in. And I love this document because it is very straightforward. It's written in a way where anyone can understand it, and it helps you guide the tenant through the process of leasing up their unit. So the next couple slides, I'm going to go through some key parts of this document. It is a handbook, and it is written in a way where it's very plain, common sense language, which is good. And all new tenants receive a copy of this, but I encourage you to go through this with the tenant. So if you're doing a tenant training with somebody, say virtually, have them follow along with you. Have a copy yourself of the document. You can use the online version. We do have a PDF available, which I'll drop in the chat later. And you can provide them with a paper copy, or they can also follow along online as well. Okay. The case management manual is a little more detailed. So if you have, it's very long. If you have very detailed questions about the program and can't get in touch with myself or Christina, this is where you should turn. This document, we can provide you with a hard copy if you'd like. We also do have a digital version of this as well, which I'll include in the chat at the end. But this document is really your 101 explanation of the 811 program. It does also talk about just other common sense tips and tricks to help somebody move into the community, things that you might want to keep in mind when you're talking with the person that you're providing services to. Very informative document. So if you can't find your answer in the My Own Front Door manual, it'll probably be in this one. Your Money or Goals is a great tool. And I encourage you to provide some of these resources to the tenant when you're helping them with leasing up, with moving into their new unit. The reason why this is important is because there are things like worksheets that help somebody through the process of budgeting. These budgeting worksheets are also in the My Own Front Door manual. If you want something that's a little bit more simple, they've been adapted, and there's copies of it in the manual itself. So take a look at that too. But if you want more in-depth, outlines or information, resources for the person you're working with, please use Your Money or Goals and some of the resources they have. When someone moves into a new apartment, they're going to have a lot of new expenses that they're not used to. Think about it. If you were in a nursing facility for years and years, and you suddenly have to think about things like groceries, you have to think about buying toilet paper, you have to think about all of these new expenses, transportation, everything. So it's a lot to actually take on. So the best way to get your tenant and your client set up for success is to go through some of these resources with them and help them with the process of getting acclimated to the community and to living independently. So the tips for being a successful renter, this is a document that we created during the pandemic to give the person who is moving into their new apartment a little bit of an overview of key things to keep in mind. I like this document. It's, again, another resource that you can go to when you're going through tenant training to give you a highlight of what you need to cover. So just to point out a couple things, always go over the lease with the person. That is the first section on this document. You can see in the far left hand corner of the first page, there's a section called Your Lease. Always go over the lease. The most important things in the lease to check are the when rent is due, and make sure that you tell the person that. You want to make sure that they know how they can pay rent. Some properties, they want them to create an online account through a portal and pay them that way. Some properties accept money orders, checks. There's all kinds of ways that they can pay their rent. You also want to make sure that the rent is correct. Unfortunately, there are times where people make errors, and we try to catch those, though, before somebody moves in and starts paying their monthly rent. However, if you notice something that looks off, reach out to me or Christina. We can assist with getting in touch with the property manager and having them fix that issue. So that's just something I want to mention. Make sure the person has their HUD 811 lease addendum for medical leave. So an individual, they have up to 180 days absence allowance from their apartment if they have a medical leave. Say they're hospitalized, say that they broke their hip and they have to be in a rehab facility for a little while before moving back into their apartment. Make sure that they have that document and that they know what their rights are. Important other things in this one pager, somebody should have a little overview of the community rules. I love this simplification of the community rules. It's still a lot of information, but it goes over the key points that we hit on when we're talking about the community rules with a tenant. So it goes through smoking policies, pets, overnight visitor policies, all kinds of information. And the tenant can look at this and say, all right, this is what I need to keep in mind. And I would encourage the people you work with, put this on their fridge, have them get a magnet, put it on the fridge. It's very easy to have this as a reference tool in the event they need it. Another great document to put on somebody's fridge is their emergency contact list. This is so, so important. In fact, if you don't have one of these yourself, I would encourage you to have one on your fridge as well. Print it in, on yellow paper, something that really attracts attention. The reason why this is so important is because if something happens to a person, say they're unconscious, they have a medical issue where they can't communicate, or maybe they're deaf and they need assistance with having their interpreter available to be able to communicate with the property because they had another medical emergency not related to their disability. This information is vital to have, and it's important that this be displayed. So if an emergency responder needs to come into somebody's apartment, they can look at this and say, okay, I need to contact this person in order to assist this individual in a more immediate way. So we have, there's templates that can be found online for this, and you can download and customize it. It looks like Christina was using a software called Smartsheet. So I'll make sure that people that attend this webinar get copies of this, the link to where to find this specific template. They can also use an emergency contact list, something a little bit more simplified like this. It's good for if they have other types of emergencies, say they have, an issue with their pet or assistance animal, that the veterinarian information is right there. Say they have an issue with, they need to know like what numbers they can call for poison control, or if their animal is poisoned, that they have those details listed there as well. Okay. So I put in the chat earlier, well before everyone logged into this call, utility information from the Office of Home Energy Programs. I included a bunch of links that are the Spanish versions of these documents, and also the OHEP manual and guide for 2021 that lists all of the program policies and procedures. Help the person you're supporting sign up for energy assistance. It is easy. It is something they likely qualify for, and it helps them save money. So when you're going through the process of helping somebody with getting a budget together, make sure that they know about energy assistance, that they have the application, they know how to apply. If they need assistance with filling out the application, there's even services that help with that, which I'm happy to provide more details on. Typically, the application is pretty straightforward though. There's a link here at the top, which I'll put into the chat on the DHS website as to where to get the application. Budget billing is another great program that I encourage people who are on a fixed income to apply for, simply because it helps them with having a very consistent BG&E bill or utility bill through their utility provider, PEPCO bill. And it's very, very straightforward. The Office of the People's Counsel is a great resource. They actually also do trainings for individuals who want to become certified to help someone apply for their critical medical needs program, which is a utility assistance and utility supports program for people with medical issues. They are an excellent resource, and the information to contact them is at the bottom here. Transportation, sorry, let me check the time real quick. Okay. Transportation. So public buses, trains, paratransit, minibuses, private options. There are many options there for an individual. This is going to look different depending on who you're working with and what they feel comfortable with, especially now during the pandemic. It's going to look different. The paratransit service is most commonly used by many people that are in our program. It's a specialized door-to-door transport service for people with disabilities who are not able to ride fixed route public transportation. Public transportation is still an option, of course. So looking up the public bus schedule and providing that to the person you're working with, so that way they know how it is that they can get around. They might also need to use taxi services. There's a program called Taxi Access, where an individual with a disability is able to get reduced fare for taxi services in the event that paratransit doesn't fully meet their needs. That is a service that is available in some places. As far as I'm aware, I believe in the Baltimore area. I'm not actually 100% sure what might be available in other areas, but paratransit and public buses are available in most areas where we have units located. There are more rural areas, though, where it might be a little bit more challenging to identify transportation. So that's where things like, having a on-demand service available for a person like Uber or Lyft could be an option. If there's a volunteer service or a dial-a-ride service, also another option as well for people who are in need of them. Okay, one moment. So the lease. The lease is a signed contract between the property owner and tenant. It gives the tenant the right to live in the property within certain rules. The property manager has to provide a copy of this to the tenant when they move in. So if the person you're working with does not have this, they need to they have to get that from the property manager. They sign the document after they complete the move-in inspection and when they get their keys. So the information that is important to highlight on the lease, again, they're going to want to know the length of the lease and conditions for renewal. How long is the lease? Is it a 12-month lease? For the 811 program, typically it's a 12-month lease. What are the conditions for renewal? How many persons are allowed to live in the unit? The amount of rent and the deposits, as well as the conditions for termination. That's important because there are situations, unfortunately, in which leases might be terminated. And so what is important to do as a case manager when you're supporting an individual is to go over that information with them. So this is the HUD 811 project rental assistance lease. The link to this document is in this slide. This is what the person needs to have. If they don't have this, if they have some other type of lease, which does happen more often than not, the property manager has to fill out this document as a requirement for the program. If they're being resistant to your request to have them fill this out, contact us. We can assist with getting them squared away with making sure that this is done. This is an important document because it is different than the leases that other people who live in the building have. There are certain allowances that are in place for the 811 program that don't exist for regular tax credit units. So they need to have this document signed and they need to have a copy of it so they know their rights. Oh, I can't see oh, okay. This is the Community Choice Homes program lease. So this is specific to the Montgomery County program I mentioned. The person has to have a copy of this lease if they are in that program. If they don't, contact us and we can assist with making sure that they have this. It goes over resident responsibilities. Again, this is a different program from 811. It is a project-based rental assistance program like 811, but it is not the same. So the content of this lease is going to be different than the 811 lease. A lot of similarities though. Most of it's the same. Okay. I can't see the top of this slide because of so key things to go over with an individual. Community rules and house rules. This is so important. The content, you don't have to go over every single thing, but it's important to hit on some key points including things like quiet hours, how long an individual can have someone visiting them. It's important to go over information like where the trash rooms are or recycling rooms, the elevators, where they're located. It's important for someone to also know the information in the community rules regarding resident disputes or issues and how they resolve those. This is so essential. I would recommend taking the My Own Front Door manual, go through that, and use that as a guide while you go through the community rules with a person during tenant training. I recommend that because it can be very overwhelming to go through every single detail of the community rules with a person. So using that as your guide is going to help you really filter out the information that is significant for a person to know and what will help them with retaining their tenancy. It's so important to go over maintenance issues. There is going to be an emergency maintenance line for most properties. So the person has to know what the distinction is between an emergency in which they call the emergency maintenance line versus one where they, they call the regular maintenance phone number. People have to record when they call the maintenance line. Have them make a note of the date of the call or contact and what the contact was about. The reason why is if the maintenance isn't completed, if they did not actually do the work that they were supposed to be doing, then that's an issue. And we have to have a track record of when the contact occurred and exactly who was spoken with, and ensuring that the property is doing what they need to do for the tenant to have a good experience in the community. Again, as I mentioned, key considerations here. Someone also needs to know what happens when they don't pay their rent. That's an issue. So they have to know the process of non-payment of rent. Also, the process of, if they receive a lease violation, what kinds of activities might lead to them having a lease violation. That's really significant for someone to know. So this slide explains how the housing subsidy works. This is important because when you're looking at somebody's lease, this is what you're looking at. If for some reason the information in the lease is not jiving with what is in this slide, then that's when you contact me or Christina to have a conversation about it and trying to get this fixed. A lot of people that work in these properties, some might be new to the 811 program. Some have never worked with the program before. Christina and I do our best to educate and educate and educate. But I will say that it does happen where the property might make a mistake. If you think something seems off and you're not sure, contact us. We can look into it and see what's actually going on. But just to give you an idea, if somebody has SSI income of 783, the 30% of their income is going to be 235. And individuals in our programs, they might receive a utility allowance of say $75. So that's factored in as well. So 30% of their income minus the utility allowance is $160 for their monthly rent. So utility allowances, people who are in the program, they receive them as like a credit essentially against their rent. So it helps with reducing the cost of their rent. They still have to pay their utility bill. They still have to have utilities in their name. They have to have an account set up and they have to pay their utility bill. Basically, the utility allowance is a little bit of extra help to make the housing expenses a little bit lower. So that's really critical. The last part of this slide, sorry, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Okay. I'm just trying to move my, okay, there we go. The rental assistance subsidy is paid directly to the owner, landlord, or property management company by the agency administering the funding. So the person should only be paying that $160. The property manager should have gotten the subsidy payment from say Department of Housing and Community Development for the 811 program. So that's pretty significant. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, so I got to the end of that presentation way earlier than I thought I would. So I have a couple questions. So I wanted to go through these. Just make sure that, okay. So are the 811 Weinberg and MFP leases and the HUD lease addendum available in Spanish and other languages beside English? So that's a good question. They should be. I can go ahead and look into that and make sure that there's copies that are available in different languages. Years and years and years ago, before my time with the department, we provided our housing resources in multiple different languages. So, so I can go ahead and look into that and make sure that I can get you guys a copy of that as well. The lease, yeah, I can look into that and make sure that you guys get a copy of it. I don't know if it is readily available on the DHCD website, so I'd have to look into that for you. Okay.
Kelsey, can I just say that for MFP bridge subsidy, the it would be the landlord's lease. There's not a specific lease for bridge subsidy. It's you know, people in bridge subsidy are basically, unless they're going in Montgomery County and going into community choice homes, in which case it would be the community choice homes lease. If they're in any other jurisdiction, most likely they're going to be getting a housing choice voucher. So the lease will be the landlord's, whatever the landlord lease is. So we'd have to look into, you know, how that could happen. I know, you know, at Maryland Department of Health, we have access to the language line. But in terms of actual written communication, I'm not sure. So we'll have to look into that.
Right.
Get back to people.
Looks like I got another question. Did you note that there is direct support for people applying to energy assistance? Yes. So the easiest way to get a hold of that would be, let me pull that up. I always encourage people to use the general assistance lines. So the Maryland Access Point is a great way to get somebody connected to different resources they may qualify for. 211 is a great resource as well. However, the one that I was specifically referring to, a couple of things. So if you have community action centers, and all of you should have a community action center or centers for where you work, they typically assist people with applications like energy assistance. They also help with different kinds of utility assistance programs that somebody could qualify for. So they generally do that kind of work. They help people sign up for things like food stamps as well. That's what their staff is assigned to do. There's another organization though that has a call center where people can call in and get assistance with different applications. So it's called Benefits Data Trust, but they work in several different states, and their Maryland Benefits Center is where I would direct people for assistance with, they help with, let's see, food stamps, Medicaids, if the person needs to sign up for Medicaid, a couple different programs, Medicare Extra Help and Low Income Subsidy for prescriptions, Medicare Savings Program, those are mostly applicable to older adults. But the Office of Home Energy Programs, OHEP Energy Assistance Benefits, is also a service that they provide. So I will provide a link to that in the chat as well. Oh, I wish that actually went through, but anyway. So that's there in the chat as well if you need to refer people to assistance. I will say this about them, mostly a lot of the application assistance again is done over the phone. So if a person might have a difficult time with navigating that, that's something to keep in mind. You can always refer somebody to a community action center as well, though, to get help with similar kind of benefit services. I'll put the phone number in the chat. It's Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. is when they operate. Okay, I'm putting that information in here. That's their phone number. Let me go to the Q&A. Looks like I have another question from Brenda. How long does it take for someone to qualify for the tenant program? So Brenda, what happens is when you have an individual who is interested in assistance through one of our programs that MPAH oversees, you have to register and create an account in Social Serve and input the person's information to see what they qualify for. As a follow-up to this webinar, I will send out links and information on how to do that if you've never done that before, and you can always contact our office if you have questions about that process. We can never tell people or give out waitlist numbers because of the way that our waitlist algorithm works. So what happens is, somebody inputs time, date, stamp on the waitlist, and then it organizes people based on priority group. So when we do a search of the wait list to try to identify eligible individuals for that unit, we're looking at the county that the person has indicated that they want to live in and the unit size that they need. So if they need a 1 or a 2 bedroom or a 3 bedroom through the Weinberg program. So that's what we're looking for. And then the actual wait list itself organizes people based on that information. So that's something to keep in mind. People can designate up to 5 counties that they might want to live in the system. All right, Melissa Gibson asks, can properties choose at a point to not renew a leasing agreement? So that can happen in the event that, there has to be a reason why somebody might not have their lease renewed. And it depends on the program as well. Again, I mentioned that Community Choice Homes operates a little bit differently than the other programs, but they do have to provide somebody with adequate notice. It's different from county to county. Like for instance, in Montgomery County, it's 60 days notice. In some other counties, it's 30, but there has to be some kind of reason. For somebody who's receiving a federal subsidy to live in an apartment, the property itself, if they choose not to renew, typically there's the actual person has received a notice to vacate and they have to leave the building for some kind of behavior or lease violation. I have, in my history of working in these programs, I have not seen that happen unless there's an actual, reason for the person not having their lease renewed. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? I'm going to take note actually of some of these questions that I need to do follow up on. But what I do recommend doing is if somebody has questions about lease renewal, things of that nature, go over that in the lease. It's in the 811 lease exactly what a person can expect in terms of their lease renewal, if they receive a notice to vacate and violations of the lease. So all of that information is right there for you. I can provide specific language on that though in a follow-up email about lease renewals. And then also I had a question about Spanish speaking materials in other languages, which is a good question. So I'll make a note of that and send that out to attendees. All right. So I know that we're wrapping up a little bit early. Does anybody else have any questions? I will provide a copy of the slides from this presentation to all of the people who have attended today. I'm going to update the information on the one slide that had slightly outdated information on 811 to make sure that you guys have the right resources and right information. And I'll also send out summaries of some of the questions today that I want to make sure that you have specific language on how certain regulations or information is relayed to the tenant from the property manager or owner. So great, thanks, Monica. So thanks everybody for attending today. This is a lot of information. We will have next week, make sure that if you want to get your certificate, you have to register and attend next week's session and the week after that as well as the last session, which is happening on September 8th. So next week's session is going to be Penny Scrivens, Marianne Graham, and Lisa Waddell. They will be going over in depth the tenant training manual, so that document that I briefly showed in one of my earlier slides. Community rules, the lease, keeping the unit clean, use of appliances, and damage to the unit. Oh, somebody asked, could you provide the link? So I did provide the link to the Benefits Center in the chat. It's bdtrust.org. That is listed a little bit earlier in the chat, and you want to go to /MD-benefits-center. I will include that though in the follow-up to this presentation as well to all of who've attended today. But make sure again to register for next week's webinar. I will send out again a link in a follow-up email to attendees. Make sure that you sign up for that. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. Looks like I have maybe one more question. Oh, you're welcome, Brenda. Thanks so much for attending. Hope you guys have a good rest of your Wednesday. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.